the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday after Christmas. I hope you all had a great Christmas, and now looking forward to getting 2020 over with. I'm done. I've had it. Enough. Yeah, it's even Christmas was like, yep, it's 2020. It sucks. So I'm looking forward to what is it? A week from, 5 days. So Friday will be the first of the year. 2021 is going to be a great year, and we can get all this BS behind us. Okay, today is going to be kind of a sad day, just because it's last show from this location. Never again will we do a Yaron Brook Show from this particular location. This is where I started the Yaron Brook Show. This is where I did the first shows. Did it for a couple of years here. Did it whenever I was in California here in this room. But that is it. We're packing up tomorrow. The movers are coming, packing all up. And by the end of, by New Year's, we will be out of this house. And sometime, hopefully in the first quarter of next year, we're going to move into a new place in Puerto Rico. So I am excited about that move. I'm excited about the new place. I think we're buying. We're hopefully signing a contract tomorrow, and then we better get back to work so that I can pay that mortgage. All right. But yes, it's going to be nice to have only one home instead of two. It's definitely a burden once you have two homes and managing them and everything. All right, just to remind everybody, I'll do it again. I'll do it again later on the show. We will have a New Year's Eve show. It will be a goodbye show to 2020. We will do a review of the year. We'll look over the year, and yeah. So it'll be an exciting show. It'll be fun. And the exciting part about it, and please, everybody, come and bring your wallets to the New Year's Eve show. It'll be a 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And it will be a $5,000 match. So anything we raise up to $5,000 will be matched by an anonymous contributor. So come online, join us, even if you can only join for a little while. I'll probably be going on, Jonathan Honing will finally get his wish, and it'll be a 3-hour show, because I'll do it until we get to $5,000. So who knows how long that'll take. We've never raised that much money on a show. So all you heavy hitters, all of you, anybody who wants to show some love for the show, support the show, this is the opportunity to do it, because you get a match dollar for dollar up to $5,000. So my estimate is everybody will be able to get a match on Thursday night, the 31st. We'll do a review of the year and answer your super chat question and raise money, and that way. And then I've got reservations for 7:30. So I'm assuming we can wrap this up in 3 hours. I'm hoping you guys don't keep me here longer than 3 hours, because I do have reservations for dinner with my wife at 7:30 that evening. We're staying at a hotel that night, because the house will be gone by then. And we'll be ready to be heading back to home in Puerto Rico. So we should be able to raise the $5,000 in those 3 hours and get it done. Let me see if there's any other logistics I needed to cover before we get on with the show today. I think that's it today. We have some of the contributors to the show. We've only got a few people on today, but I think that's a consequence of the fact that it is holiday season. But that is, of course, an opportunity for you guys to ask questions as well on the super chat. So we'll do both of those, and of course we'll let the questionnaires do a number of rounds as long as we can. All right. Somebody asked me a mortgage. Yeah, of course a mortgage. Somebody says I get a tax deduction. Not in Puerto Rico. You know, it's a funny thing. When you don't pay taxes, you don't get a mortgage deduction, or the mortgage deduction is not that valuable. So yeah, one of the costs of not paying taxes is you don't get a deduction on your mortgage interest expense. Yeah. And so anyway, $5,000 challenge is December 31st. Remember, December 31st. It's going to be the $5,000 challenge match. All right, let's see. I need a mortgage because I'm buying something beyond my means. I always do that. I always buy something that I can't afford. That's how you push yourself in life. I'm always borrowing to live the standard of living to which I aspire and I know I can get to. And I know you guys, 2021 is going to be a great year on Super Chat and on those monthly contributions. That's going to pay my mortgage, right? Okay, let us start with Roy.
Okay, so I'd like to talk about Valley of Tears.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for recommending it. Had you not recommended, it's very unlikely that I would have.
So just to give everybody a context, Valley of Tears is a show on HBO Max. It is an Israeli show, so it's in Hebrew and in some Arabic, and it is a show about the Yom Kippur War. So it's 10 episodes. 10 episodes. Highly recommended if you can tolerate violence. It's very violent. Go ahead, Roy. Sorry.
Yeah. So the thing is, I can't recall a more intimate or convincing portrayal of soldiers in battle, any movie I've ever seen or any video. I also can't recall one that was more gripping. I mean, some of the scenes were almost unbearably heart-wrenching.
Yep.
You know, tears flowing, and it's just, yeah, heart-wrenching.
And there's no happy ending, just to let people know. you know.
Well, yes, I mean, it's the end of a battle. The war then continues off screen, and a
lot of the people you follow, bad stuff happens to them, and it ends with you not knowing what their ultimate fate is.
Yeah, and some you do know what their ultimate fate is. Yes, no, it's not a romantic comedy, right? Exactly. But another strength I found is the clarity of the battle scenes. In many other films, battles are just like a largely undifferentiated tangle of soldiers and shooting and stabbing and bombing. And at the end, you hear what happened, but you're just watching a lot of action and movement. And you can't, I find it hard in most of these other films to really be involved with it. But here, the dialogue very smartly lets you, the audience, know what the strategy of the operation is, the strategy of the battle is.
Yep.
And then the action, you can follow it as an audience. And so there's much more of a sense of participation and involvement. I think it's an extraordinary technical accomplishment of writing and direction and editing. So an exceptional piece. Now, here's where I have the question. When you told us about the show, you said something in passing about leftists, some leftist stuff.
Yep.
You know, like, oh yeah, it's sort of obligatory, and that's where I have some questions about it, because some of it I didn't understand, and I thought just about none of it belonged in this film or in this piece. So we have Malat, and I'm not giving, these are no spoilers, because this stuff you know right off the bat.
Yep.
Malachi, Marco, and Alush
Yeah.
are all members of some sort of resistance or protest movement, though it's not clear, at least to me, a non-Israeli, what that movement was. So that's one part A of the question is what movement? Let me finish the part B, and then I'll be all ears. And also, the relevance is not clear at all because all three are corporals in the Israeli army. They all fight, with determination. So it's not as if they're sort of giving it a half-hearted, oh, we have to do this to cover our ass. And then also the other character who I think, Ben Dror, who plays a writer, he's a self-avowed socialist and pacifist.
Yep.
But that's almost irrelevant. His role in this that has any dramatic impact is that he's there trying to find his son.
Yep.
Who has enlisted, or maybe he was drafted, I don't know. He moved back to Israel so that he could enlist, right? So that has no relevance. So the two parts, A, what movement are they talking about? And B, why was this put in? Because this seems to me irrelevant. And now I'll shut up.
Yeah, I mean, they called themselves the Black Panthers because they were trying to mimic the Black Panthers in the United States. So, and they would definitely, it was what you'd call today kind of a social justice movement. It was about both fighting against racism in Israel, and I'll get to that in a minute, but also poverty in Israel. I mean, this is a period in which there is a lot of poverty in Israel. And the poverty in Israel is primarily manifest in a certain group of people, and that has to do with the racism. The writer is there to give you lines like this war could have been avoided. Dayan and Golda Meir, could have signed a peace accord and didn't. Now, I don't think any of that is true, but part of what the writers are trying to convey is that this was an avoidable war. This was not a necessary war. The Arab wanted peace. And because of the Israeli government's kind of hawkish, even though it was a Labour Party, they were socialists, even though they were socialists in power, they were hawkish attitude towards Arab countries, they declined that peace, and therefore this war happened. So it's trying to shift the blame to the Israeli political class instead of to the Arabs, and to create a certain moral equivalency. That's the purpose of having him there. And then I think having the Black Panthers, these young guys, it's there to say, Israel's not such a great country, wasn't such a great country back then. And yet, they still fought for it. And then what did we do to them? What did we do for them? What have we done for them since then? Has their lot really improved in life, even though they shed their blood for the country? So it's trying to make a social commentary. None of that is necessary qua war movie. The war movie stands on its own. The war, as you said, the battle scenes stand on their own. They don't require any of this. But it is a little bit of a undercutting of Israeli society and the Israeli now, the Israeli political class needed to be condemned, but for other reasons, not for not signing a peace treaty, because there was no such treaty on the table. It's primarily because they missed all the intelligence signals and didn't prepare for war, and it turns out, here's an interesting story for you vis-a-vis American foreign policy in Israel. So this is 1973. And from what I recently read from unearthed new documents about the war, Golda Meir, who was the prime minister of Israel, about a day before knew that the war was going to break out. And she faced the choice. She could have launched a preemptive strike like Israel did in 1967, probably saved the lives of 80% of the Israeli casualties that Israel took in this war. Probably, a couple of thousand Israeli kids, 18-year-olds, their lives would have been saved if they'd gone preemptive. However, she had been told by Kissinger was Secretary of State under Nixon at the time, that the United States would not support Israel ever if Israel did what it did in the Six-Day War and started the war preemptively. So she had to make a choice between, do I save the lives of these kids by going preemptive and not letting this war get out of hand? Or do I wait, knowing I'm going to take huge casualties, but not pissing off the Americans and getting American support once the war starts? And she chose the second. She chose to appease the Americans. And to a large extent, those casualties that you saw there, Roy, were a consequence of that choice. Now, they also didn't let the troops on the ground know that a war was coming. They also did not round up the reserves and get them in place to be prepared for the attack, so that the troops on the ground were completely surprised. The reserves took 3 days to get to the front lines. Israel took massive casualties, almost lost the war, had nukes in the air because they were worried about losing, and the nukes on airplanes in the air, ready to bomb Damascus and Cairo. All of this in anticipation of losing because it was so bad. The plus side is, from her perspective, from Golda Meir's perspective, is that once it was clear that Israel didn't start the war, America immediately was on Israel's side and started sending massive quantities of weapons over, starting, I think, on day 3. One of the largest airlifts of weaponry in history occurred on that day, starting that day. And Israel, of course, rebounded and basically won the war and crushed, for the most part, crushed the enemy. But those are the kind of political calculations I think they should have been criticized for, rather than what the movie does. Now, in terms of what were the Black Panthers fighting against, so Israel has many groups, Jews from a lot of different parts of the world. But there's basically a differentiation between Ashkenazi Jews, who are mostly Eastern European, some Western European, but mostly European Jews. Again, mostly from Eastern Europe and Central Europe. And Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews are from North Africa, from the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of Southeastern Europe, but primarily Northern Africa. These are primarily the Jews who were kicked out of Spain during the Inquisition. Some of them went to Western Europe, so the Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam, London, certainly in France, and a lot of other places. The founders of Israel were primarily Ashkenazi Jews, or not all of them. And there were certainly Sephardic Jews in Israel at the time well before Israel was founded. But there was a massive migration, most of it forced by Arab countries in 1949 and into the early 50s, from Morocco, from Yemen, from Iraq, from all over the Middle East and North Africa. Forced migration of Sephardic Jews into Israel. They were kicked out of the Arab countries. They couldn't bring their wealth. Whatever wealth they had was confiscated by the local governments. They were put on planes and sent to Israel. And when they arrived in Israel, Israel was ill-prepared for them. It was a poor country. They were put in tent cities, and they never, for many decades, they never really recovered. In addition, the European Jews treated the Ashkenazi Jews with a lot of disdain. They were viewed as less sophisticated, less civilized. There was real racism in Israel between Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews. Now, I never really felt it, but that's because I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, so I never experienced, I never felt, I never discriminated against Sephardic Jews, but I never saw it around me. But my wife, who is a Sephardic Jew, definitely felt it. So she was clearly experienced, the equivalent of racism in Israel from Ashkenazi Jews towards her, because she is a Sephardic. Sephardic Jews tend to have darker skin. The three heroes in that scene in the tank corps that you mentioned are all Sephardic Jews, and they all come from Arab countries. That's why they all speak Arabic, and they constantly, throughout the series, speak Arabic. They are, fighting for against discrimination. They're fighting for equal rights. They're fighting, and they're also very poor, so they're fighting against poverty. So it's a mixture of legitimate struggle and a socialist struggle that comes from poverty. And that's kind of where they come from. The author that you mentioned, the leftist author, is a socialist Ashkenazi Jew who is, very, he's with the cause and everything, but he's with the cause of those discriminated, but he's never experienced it. He doesn't know anything about it. That's kind of and Israel still has a little bit of that discrimination. When my wife and I got married, it was a little bit of this, like a mixed marriage, like you would view here. It's ridiculous and bizarre, and we never thought in those terms, but certainly people around us did. So Israel's an interesting place. People talk about Israel. Israel's one race in Israel. No, I mean, they're all Jews there, but they don't look alike. They don't have the same features. They don't have the same skin color. They are literally people who are black. Ethiopian Jews are black. And so it's a very multi-ethnic or multi-quote racial culture, because, I don't believe in race, but from the perspective of the common culture, it's a very multiracial culture. So it's Israel is an interesting place. Anyway, that was
very interesting. And thank you.
Yeah. And this is a war, I think I said when I introduced the show, this is a war. I was 12 years old when it broke out. I was in synagogue when it broke out, and because it was Yom Kippur, we went to synagogue. In those days, we went to synagogue in the high holidays, but also sometimes on the Sabbath. But we certainly on the high holidays went to synagogue. So I was in synagogue, and you could tell something was up, because every once in a while, somebody in a military uniform would come into the synagogue, go up to a man who was praying there, whisper something in his ear. The guy would immediately fold everything up and leave very quickly. And this kept happening. It was clear that they were calling up the reserve. This is in the morning before the war actually broke out. And then suddenly the sirens go off, and we all run into the air raid shelter. And at that point, I'm getting choked up. Weirdly, at that point, my dad leaves. He says, and he basically says, I better go home, better get my uniform, better get my gun, and leave. And he does. And we stayed in the air raid shelter until they stopped, and then we went home. I think we saw him off, but I'm not sure. Maybe we didn't see him off. Remember, and he was gone. And remember, no cell phones. So he was gone now for weeks before we saw him again, into a war that was brutal, into a war that people were clearly dying. My father was a doctor. So he was a medical doctor on the front lines. He was there's a scene, a big part of a scene in the beginning at the Hermon, which is this outpost on the tallest mountain in Israel. And when they recaptured that, it was a very bloody battle. He was there. He was on the Golan Heights where this show occurs most of the war. And it was, and we basically, when we got home, we went back into the air raid shelter at the apartment complex, this apartment with 5 different condominiums. And I was the oldest male in the building because everybody else was off at war. I was 12, and I was the oldest male in the building. I had a young sister who was at the time, had just been born. She'd been born a week earlier. So we had a week-old baby. My brother was 2 years younger than me, myself and my mother, my father off to war. And then the other thing I remember vividly is every few days, a car would come into the neighborhood, drive down the street, stop somewhere, and a soldier, female, male soldiers would get out carrying flowers. And you knew, now you watched which door were they going to, because, they were coming to tell somebody their father had died, their spouse had died in the war. So you watched it from the window of the condo, which condominium building were they going into? And, and you were, of course, always worried they were coming to yours. And so that's, you grow up fast in Israel. I always say that you grow up fast in Israel because you experience things that, a typical American doesn't. Even the Vietnam War was far away. As many soldiers as died there as a percentage of the population, far less than as died in Israel in the Yom Kippur War. It's a tiny little country. Everybody knows everybody. You certainly know people who lose. So it's a very intense experience. The terrorism, the wars, it's there in your face. So yeah. All right. Somebody asked about what type of tank did you crew in the IDF? I crewed on a Centurion. I think probably the last, or among the last people in the Centurion. The M60s were coming in, and the Israeli tank, the Merkava, was coming in. So I was on the relatively primitive old Centurions that they were still putting up in the Golan Heights. I was the gunner. I was a gunner on the tank until I was in tank command school, tank commander school. So they had identified me as going to be a tank commander and then an officer. And in tank commanding school, already before tank commanding school, but I ignored it. But in tank commanding school, basically my back let out. I had 2 ruptured discs. I landed up having massive surgery and couldn't go back to the tanks, was shifted to military intelligence, where I spent most of my career in the Army. So that is my, but I could tell stories all day about this stuff. But, when I was in the tank corps, this was in the winter of 1980. We were in training in the desert, but heading up to the Golan Heights, heading towards the Golan Heights. And there was they basically stopped, usually you went home for like the Saturday. Every 2 weeks you'd go home, or every 3 weeks you'd go home. But they stopped sending us home. And they stopped sending us home because there was intelligence that a war was going to break out in the spring. And we knew that in the spring, we would be the cannon fodder. We would be the front line, the first tanks in a confrontation with the Syrians on the Golan Heights. And the intelligence was that the Syrians had amassed tanks on the border with Israel through the winter under cloud cover. And that a war was going to break out. So we had the song that we were singing that, the words to it were, "I know I'm going to die this summer," that basically became our little troop song during that winter and early spring. And then it turned out, because later I was in military intelligence and I was adjacent to the unit where the call had been made that a war was going to break out. And it turned out that they had made a mistake, that they had thought that a bunch of clouds were tanks or something like that, a bunch of rocks were tanks, and they completely screwed up. And the intelligence was false intelligence. I gave those guys hell because I didn't get to go home weekend after weekend after weekend because they screwed up the intelligence. Anyway, don't get me started on stories because I could go on forever. Thanks, Roy. That took me on a half an hour tangent. But that was good. Hope you guys enjoyed that. All right, Daniel.
Quite the story indeed. Matthew Broker, a British journalist, has been living in Hong Kong for more than 25 years, wrote a story that was published in Bloomberg, A Farewell to the Hong Kong I Loved. And he tells a lot that has changed, in the time that he's lived there. And at the end, he kind of says, as sad as this is, I really don't think the Chinese will crush the Hong Kong spirit. And then he says, the soul of Hong Kong, which I associate with an outward-looking attachment to universal values of freedom, individual dignity, and justice. Now, by dignity here, doesn't he mean food, shelter, healthcare handed out by the taxpayers? I mean, isn't that exactly opposite of freedom and justice for everyone? Forget about Hong Kong for a minute. If any country or culture was based on freedom, justice, and give me free stuff, aren't they doomed to failure?
I'm not sure he's talking about the free stuff here. So I'd have to research how they use the word dignity in, let's say, British culture. But my sense is that he means dignity as rule of law, treating people as equals, equals in a good sense, in the political sense, in the sense of no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, you're a human being, right? And I think importantly, because think about what's associated with dignity, even today to some extent, it's work is associated with dignity. The opportunity to work, the opportunity to make a living, the opportunity to have dignity and honor in your own life. So I'm maybe spinning this a little benevolently in terms of what I think he means. And I think I'm doing that because of knowing people in Hong Kong, right? And knowing the people of Hong Kong. And they're not, I mean, the young people, put aside the young people, unfortunately, are much more inclined towards a welfare state type system in Hong Kong. There's a whole generation that's been brought up, just like here and everywhere else, at universities and schools with a leftist agenda. But in the people I know in Hong Kong, the older generation and maybe more of the liberty-minded young people, there's a certain love of the fact that people come there as immigrants with nothing. And the dignity is that they get a job and they can earn a living and they can live well. It's not handouts. Handouts are the anti-dignity. So I don't know what this guy means, but that's how I think of Hong Kong. That's what I think Hong Kongers mean by dignity.
Yeah, okay. And it may have been just the tinges I got from him from early other things he wrote in the article about, here's one I can find real quickly, which finally brought in a minimum wage in 2010. And, there's other things that he talks about that I thought he was handed towards the handouts, but maybe I'm being unfair with
so maybe he is one of those more leftist, who've complained bitterly about poverty in Hong Kong and poverty and not enough handouts and we don't do enough. There are handouts in Hong Kong. There is a small safety net. There is a minimum wage, although it's low. But it's, and the free market people in Hong Kong always complain bitterly about regulations and controls and all this stuff. And I used to laugh at them saying, you think that's bad. You don't know what it's like elsewhere in the world. They're the most economically free place in the world, and they were complaining about regulations and controls, which they're right to do because one regulation and control is too much. So, and redistribution is too much. But the people I know valued freedom and would be horrified by the idea. But certainly the intellectuals in Hong Kong are just like intellectuals everywhere. And maybe this author is the same way. And it's sad, but that's the fight we're in constantly, right? It's that there's almost nobody there are very few intellectuals on our side, very few.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. All right, 646 area code. There you go.
Hey, Yaron, it's Andrew.
Hey, Andrew, how's it going?
Good. That's a very interesting answer about Israel. You had mentioned previously that Warren Buffett is lauded for having a cheap car and living in a cheap house.
Yep.
Also another popular entrepreneur, Gary Vee, it reminded me, I sometimes listen to his videos, and he's he's really productive, which is great. And he's really enthusiastic and about problem solving.
Yep.
He talks a lot about not being into stuff, like, doesn't generate energy for him to kind of have nice stuff.
Yeah.
And that always kind of strikes me wrong.
Yep.
And I just wanted to see, like, what do you think is behind that mentality? I mean, what do you, how do you put your finger on what's wrong with that? And what do you think is behind that mentality?
Well, I think it's a mind-body split, right? It's the idea that mind is good, right? So productive, being productive, thinking, being passionate, engaging in problem solving, that's good. But bodily stuff, physical stuff, there's something tainted about that. So nice car, nice house, sex, even art, something just not quite right about it, right? And so I think it's a mind-body split, which is very common in our culture, and it manifests itself in all kinds of subtle ways. Ayn Rand wrote a lot about the mind-body dichotomy. She viewed it as one of the real evils that we inherit from Christianity and real evil themes in our culture. So I think that's the source of it. I think that's where the problem lies. Of course, Rand objectivism holds that there is no split between mind and body. Mind and body are one, which is what is good for the mind is also good for the body, if you understand what good is. And what good for the body is good for the mind. And pleasure is pleasurable for a reason. It's good for you. And comfort is good. Beauty is particularly good, both mind and body. So it really is that Christian, I think it's also Kantian split that exists out there that is that infiltrates every aspect of our lives. That is how you see it in Hank Reardon a little bit, right? But and as the novel progresses, he fights it. He buys a convertible. He enjoys it. He sleeps with Dagny. Finally, he's having fun with sex. He's but in terms of the house he lives in, he doesn't care his wife bought it. In terms of what's hanging on the walls, he doesn't care his wife bought it. All he cares about is work. Well, Rand is telling us that's not right. That's not right for Reardon to think that way. He should care.
With Gary V, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, Gary V, it's like I get the sense that he's almost afraid that if he enjoyed stuff, he would fall into kind of a materialistic abyss. It is very much a split, mentality.
Right. So the idea is that the body is evil, the mind is good, the spiritual is good, and even if you're not religious, people hold this, and therefore that the body is corrupting, and if you like stuff, you will become a materialist. You will abandon all spiritual values, and you will descend into this hell. So yes, that is one of the many things Christianity has imbued our culture with. It's one of the many reasons why, as you know, I despise Christianity as much as I do.
Yes.
But yes, it's very much like, and I always say, you got to live well. Particularly if you got the money, and sometimes when you don't, you've got to live well. And living well means surrounding yourself with beauty, which feeds your spirit, but is also materially pretty to look at. You want to live comfortably. You want to, if you value driving, you want to drive a fun car. If you just comfort, you want to drive a comfortable car, whatever. But there's no reason to shun material things. If I've always, since I've had a little bit of money, I've always, for example, gotten the biggest television I can get. Right? I mean, I'm not talking about the ones that cost $100,000, but I'm talking about within reason. Yeah, Best Buy. I always go and say, okay, what's the biggest TV you have? I like movies, and I'm going to watch them.
What's the biggest you've gotten?
85 inch.
Wow.
So I've had
I
85
don't
inch.
think I've ever seen an 85 inch.
Yes, I've had an 85 inch television for a long time, even when they were quite expensive and pretty rare in terms of now you can just walk into Best Buy and they're there. But I had one because you know what? What's the money for if not to make my life more comfortable, more fun, more enjoyable, more entertaining, all that stuff. So, I'm not recommending necessarily that people go out on a financial limb as I often do, but I am recommending that you live. You don't live with expectation. You don't live in order to die rich, or live by deny yourself when you have the money and you have the funds.
Great, thank you.
So sure. All right, let's see. Let's do some super chat. You meant the German population had to be nihilistic on a never before seen level, where they were willing to systematically exterminate other members of our species. Are people in the West today on the road to being consumed with that much hate and rage? I mean, it's possible, but remember that, and this is the thing, Jordan Peterson talks about this, but it's true in the case of Germany, that it wasn't that if you walked around Germany 5 years before the rise of Hitler, you would say, oh yeah, these people are hating and raging. And so therefore Hitler makes sense. It's not how these things work. One of the things that Leonard Peikoff in Ominous Parallels talks about, and you need to read that book if you're interested at all at any of these issues, is how ideas lead people to be willing to exterminate millions of fellow human beings. And part of it is they're trained in the ethics of duty. So it's not that millions of Germans raged and hated and despised, but millions of Germans were willing to follow orders. Millions of Germans were willing to do whatever the philosopher king, the spiritual leader of the Aryan people, told them to do. Whatever they believed the categorical imperatives or their duties obliged them to do. That is what they were willing to do. So it's not that everybody who pulled the trigger or every guard that ushered the Jews into the gas chambers or any one of them who scooted out the bodies and put them in a furnace. It's not that every one of those people was a nihilist, hated and raged, but that every one of those people were willing to follow duty, to do what they were told, to not question, to assume the authorities were authorities. Think about it. Take this example. Hopefully this would clarify. And this is my counter to another Jordan Peterson point. Take Abraham and Jacob. God comes to Abraham and says, I want you to sacrifice your oldest son to me. I want you to kill him. And Abraham says, yes. Is Abraham willing to sacrifice his oldest son because he's a nihilist? Because he hates? Because he rages? No. Abraham is willing to sacrifice his oldest son because he follows orders, because he's thoughtless, because he's a follower of commandments. So that's a duty ethics. That's what people are trained to do by German philosophy come the 1930s and 40s. They're prepped. And the burst in the 1930s, in a sense of just subjectivism and rejection of all absolute truths, just sets up, triggers that in the culture, which is said, no, that leads to mayhem and nihilism and destruction and anarchy and all that. No, what we really need to do is just follow orders. And they do. And it's always nutty when you think about it, because they go from nihilism in the sense of rioting in the streets and crazy modern art and so-called art and democracy gone amok and all of this stuff, to suddenly all these, including all the leftists, are ready to follow orders. So it's stunning how quickly a transition happens. And one of the things I saw in 2020, I think, was that epistemology, that abandonment of reason, abandonment of facts in the name of following orders. And that's what I think is scary. And that's why I think it's not so much that what you see out there is rage and people. It's, are you seeing a mentality change in America where Americans would be willing to just accept orders rather than think for themselves, don't tread on me, real freedom and real liberty? And I worry that we're there. I worry that the West is moving in that direction. But I don't know that you could have seen it coming before Hitler in Germany. And I don't know you're going to see it coming here in the United States. I mean, in a sense, we're seeing it right now. But will you literally see it coming? Will you be able to predict the exact date of it? No, you'll see the trend. And that's why I always say the fascism is a backlash against kind of the leftist nihilist disintegration, which then demands order. And the order can lead to great violence in the name of that order, in the name of getting things right, in the name of what? In the name of duty. In the name of duty. I mean, some of the worst of the Nazis in the when they were on trial, I mean, made the claim I was just following orders. And I believe some of them. They were just following orders. So what do you make of the corporals who were pulling the triggers? They were also just following orders. But it's the idea that you're willing to just follow orders. That's what's scary. And that's not necessarily nihilism in you. It's an unthinking, it's an unbelievable irrationality and immorality in you. But I don't know that it's nihilism in you. Okay, one more from Michael, because he put a lot of money behind these. I've noticed politically right-wing pro-capitalist intellectuals hold Kantian epistemology. How did their Kantian ethics and epistemology lead to a pro-capitalist political orientation like that of Jordan Peterson, who is clearly a Kantian? This relates to the question I think I answered last show, maybe from you, Michael, I don't know, about the culture. The fact that there's a Kantian culture out there, and yet we're not all dead, right? We're not all finished, right? So what's holding us together? And I said there's a battle going on between the Kantian intellectuals, a certain percentage of our population that's Kantian, and certain elements in the culture that are pro-reality, pro-production, pro-happiness. And that battle is ongoing, the Enlightenment versus Kant. Think of it also that battle is going inside the mind, the soul of somebody like Jordan Peterson. See, yes, Jordan Peterson is this weird combination of religion and Kant and bizarre philosophy and a little bit of a duty ethic mentality. But he also has elements of pro-freedom, pro-capitalism elements, they're certainly not pure. Pro-personal responsibility in a healthy sense. Some of it's unhealthy, but some of it's healthy. Because he's got remnants of the Enlightenment. He talks about the Enlightenment. He's quite good when he talks about the Enlightenment, when he talks about the individualism of the Enlightenment. So in people's souls, in people's minds, there is a battle going on between the self-destructive, anti-reason, anti-reality, intellectual remnant that they have gotten from the universities, they've gotten from the intellectuals, maybe they got directly from Kant and others, on the one hand, and a pro-reality, wanting to live, desire to live, having a mind that can see what works and what doesn't work, and saying, capitalism works, socialism doesn't, so I'm against socialism. But you can see how he has to undercut the capitalism because he can't completely trust that. So if you saw his debate with Zizek, the socialist, communist, he doesn't really want to defend capitalism. He wants to attack socialism. So, yeah, he's battling, in his intellectual influences versus kind of the common sense, the reality orientation that is part of who he is, the part of what he is, part of having to deal with the world. Nobody can be, not even Kant, a pure Kantian. Nobody can be nobody can really live if they assume they have no knowledge of reality itself as it is. So life is impossible. So they have to embrace certain aspects of the Enlightenment, certain aspects of living in order to survive. And then it's a battle inside them, a clash. Who's going to win out? Okay, Roy.
Okay, now a different recommended series. You, in talking about Firefly,
yeah,
you said that you were sorry that it wasn't renewed or that it was over because you like those characters.
Yep.
Now, what I'm going to recommend is another example. By the way, I've seen now 6 episodes of Firefly, and the strongest quality it has is the characters.
Yep.
Their devil-may-care attitude, their devilish sense of humor, their self-assurance, their love of adventure. The plots are a little hurried. You're getting into 45 minutes, plus commercials.
Yep.
And so they have to rush through, get it over with, with one clever idea, and then boom. Okay. But I still look forward to each episode because I want to see those people.
Yep.
Now, there's a South Korean series from about maybe 6 years ago that also has 20 episodes. It's called Misaeng, Misaeng. Now, I have no idea how it's pronounced because every time I see in the English, the English subtitle, a Korean word, and I hear them pronounce it in the actual text, I say, but that's not what they're saying. So I have no idea how it's properly pronounced in Korean. But Misaeng, which means incomplete life, or not yet alive, is a term from the game of Go, which is very popular in Korea. I think it's called Baduk. I may not have it quite right in Korea. Now, the action takes place in a global trading company, and is very much value driven as well as personality driven. So they deal with things like independence, self-assurance and confidence, integrity, but also raises issues of the Korean class system, which I learned about from Mr. Sunshine.
Yep.
And then again from My Country, thinking, oh my God, the 19th century and the 13th century are very bad to be born lowborn in Korea. Well, apparently that's not totally gone. So that's an interesting thing. Office politics, and we trace the progress of some individuals from raw recruits, interns, and we watch them over a period, just a few years, as they grow, gain in confidence, interface. It's wonderful. It's superbly written, superbly acted. And I find myself, I'm going to start crying now because I find myself missing them. I find myself, I want to see what's happening to them now a year later. It's really quite wonderful. And there's an actor who had a prominent role in Mr. Sunshine, who has a prominent role in Miss Aang, and I didn't recognize him. Part of it is because it was filmed 5 years roughly earlier than Mr. Sunshine, and partly because he's such a damn good actor. He reinvents himself for each part. So my highest, 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever the highest rating is. It's a Netflix offering.
Yep, good. Something to look forward to watching. Daniel.
Kind of continuing a little bit different tangent on Andrew's question. What do you think Miss Rand might have said if she saw how New York City was basically shut down by our response to the virus? That we took shelter in place and wear a mask, and we just pretty much meekly did it. When I don't know, maybe I'm slanted, maybe I'm biased here, but I feel like it was pretty obvious that there were other methods that were working in other places in the world, the testing, tracing, quarantining, without shutting down a city like New York City. What do you think she would have had to say about it? About the culture, what it says about Americans?
Well, I mean, there's a sense in which I hate questions like that because who knows what Ayn Rand would have said, in the sense that she's such a genius. She would have had something much more interesting and original than anything I could say about it. But I think she'd be horrified. I mean, she would be truly horrified. Here's the city she loved, the city she thought represented everything good about America and everything good about life in the world: vibrancy, productiveness, energy, culture, skyscrapers, just vibrant, moving, productive. That's what, and suddenly becoming a ghost town by decree. I mean, it would have been one thing if things had slowed because people had chosen to stay home and not coming to work for a while because of the virus. But the authorities would shut it down out of that fear, that Americans would just succumb to that New Yorkers would just accept that. The New Yorkers who have the chutzpah, right? Who are usually right in your face, that usually don't give an inch, suddenly gave everything, walked away from their own city, walked away from their own culture, walked away from their own jobs. I think she'd be horrified. I think she'd consider that a symbol of the end of the country. And again, it's one thing if there was a voluntary lockdown for a few weeks to flatten the curve, but this isn't. This is a forced lockdown for months upon months upon months. And now, of course, they're again in a lockdown through the winter until the vaccines. So who knows how long this will last? It's just unthinkable. And if you would ask any of us a year ago if this was possible, for a virus that kills, let's not. I don't think COVID is nothing. I don't think COVID doesn't kill. I don't think COVID is irrelevant. I think COVID is real and dangerous and can inflict real damage. But at the same time, it is a virus that only kills a certain segment of the population, or almost always only kills only segment. It's a virus where the mortality rate for the overall population is very low, well under 1%. And for where children and young people, the mortality rate is basically zero. And we're shutting down the world.
Mhm.
It's just, it truly is unthinkable that we are doing this. I mean, you're in California, right, Dan?
No, I'm in Chicago now.
You're in Chicago. Well, in California, I mean, now the ICUs are full in California.
Yeah.
And one has to wonder, with all these shutdowns, with all these restrictions, with all the mask wearing, with everything going on. And now, granted, Californians don't really, particularly in Orange County, nobody's really wearing a mask. But with all of these top-down decrees, why are the ICUs still full? And it's because our whole approach to this has been wrong and flawed and a disaster. And this, and the problem is that while this is a massive failure of government, it is going to be blamed on the private sector, and the government will be viewed as the savior. And it is, truly, truly, I mean, it's hard to believe what's happened in the last year in terms of COVID.
Well, and forget about looking back a year and what we would have said about today. Let's start today and look a year forward. If this happens again, have we learned anything? I mean, Singapore and Taiwan definitely learned after SARS how to deal with it. Has the U.S. learned?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, if I look at some of the epidemiologists, it's interesting that before this, not a single epidemiologist in the United States would have said the solution to a COVID-like virus is lockdowns.
Right.
Now, almost all of them are fans of lockdowns. Now, maybe they're fans of lockdowns because everything else failed, but I'm not convinced. And it's truly, I don't know. It's just truly, truly weird. And how bad it is, and how even the critics are not criticizing for the right reasons. Right? That's the thing. There's just no opposition that's rational. The opposition, I see it all the time, even among objectivists. Oh no, the whole thing is a conspiracy. Really, the ICU is full because of a conspiracy?
Right.
And it's a conspiracy not just in the United States, but global. Even the South Koreans, who dealt with this very well in the beginning, are seeing a spike right now and are struggling a little bit to deal with it. Is that a conspiracy as well? I mean, it's just, this is the epistemology that has shocked me. The epistemological state of the world that shocked me so much is around COVID and around Trump. And I see a lot of similarities and a lot of parallels between the two. And the epistemology is of irrationality and inability to think. Just do the basic work of thinking.
Agreed.
It's just so
agreed.
disappointing. And yeah, our tendency now is to find the immediate solution is an authoritarian one. It's not to solve problems. It's the only way to solve problems is by using more authority, by using more force. That's the knee-jerk reaction now.
But did anything come in Pennsylvania? I think you said they were trying to limit executive authority there. There was some kind of a,
a court did do that, but then it must have been overturned, or there was some kind of injunction that made it irrelevant, because Pennsylvania is still under, particularly the city of Philadelphia, is still under pretty harsh lockdown kind of stuff. So it doesn't seem like the courts are going to bail us out in this one. And early on in the pandemic, when legal experts were asked about it, they basically said, no, there's nothing in the Constitution that prevents government from taking this kind of power. Now, I think that's a false reading of the Constitution, but these were conservative constitutional scholars. So if they can't find it, certainly one wouldn't expect random judges to find it in the Constitution. So it's very depressing. All right, Andrew.
Hi. Can you hear me, Euro?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, okay. Wanted to ask you something about something in psychology that I've observed. I think one of the most important issues to kind of for people to deal with psychological problems is, principle that's covered fairly well in objectivism, which is to check whether your emotions are rational. And not just blindly accept that your emotional response is true.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think goes on, I've noticed is, when psychologists help people with things that occurred in their childhood, I kind of feel like anybody could develop anybody could claim a complex by things that happened in childhood. It's not saying that, there aren't real bad things that happen in childhood, but like when people talk about their parents and their relationship with their parents, that's a very complicated relationship. And I think parents have a very hard job, and they're not going to do everything right. Yep. And a child can always, and an adult who's revisiting childhood can always kind of zero in on the bad and create a complex from that. And, what I don't hear a lot of, psychology seems to get better when somebody's an adult, certainly in cognitive behavioral therapy, at teaching a person to check their emotions and teaching all of kind of these fallacies of thinking that result in uncalibrated emotions or irrational emotions, however you want to put it. But for some reason, when it comes to like a child's thinking or conclusions that a person made in their childhood, they're not as good at teaching the person to check to not just accept that their impressions that they formed in childhood were true. It seems to be that they just kind of reaffirm this was the case. You had a narcissistic mother and you suffered because of it. But there's never really there's just kind of this, you were a child and this is true. Meanwhile, in childhood, you're more apt to make mistakes in thinking and to overgeneralize conclusions because you don't have the experience and you're going to be wrong more often. So I kind of wanted to just run it by you and get, I know it's not your expertise, but do you have any thoughts on why psychology, would treat the child's impressions as sacrosanct and be better at checking adults' emotional impressions on things?
Well, partially because I think objectively, the child is not in control of himself quite like an adult is. So it's hard for a child to check himself, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. You want to encourage them to do so, but it's hard to do that. Because they don't have the full capacity to reason, because their frontal lobe is not fully developed, even biologically, just physically. So children, in a sense, get a pass because of their inability really to be fully rational. Adults are fully rational and therefore don't get a pass. I wouldn't call emotions irrational. The emotion is what it is. It's not rational or irrational. The question is it based on a rational conclusion or not? Is it based on irrational thoughts, irrational conclusions? That's where you get irrationality. But I wouldn't make the emotion itself. I wouldn't call it rational or irrational. It's the conclusion that led to it, rational or irrational. And I think, I'm not sure I agree with you that psychology doesn't view, once you're an adult, you came to some wrong conclusions when you were a child, and that's causing these wrong emotions or these detached from reality emotions in you as an adult, right? I think they do that. I think even Freud talks about that. So it's that we don't necessarily expect children to be able to self-analyze while they're growing up because they don't have the rational capacity to do so. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've observed this, that there is a distinction. And there, I get it from a child's perspective. I mean, I think that should always be the goal, whether it's child psychology or adult psychology, that the point is to get somebody's emotions in line with rationality.
Yeah, but if you're not capable of rationality, then it's hard to get them in line.
But you can get them more in line with rationality as a child.
Good parenting, to a large extent, helping the child do that.
Yeah. I wonder if Christianity has a role there too, because there is, to me, like a coddling of the so-called inner child, which I think is counterproductive. I just think that I sense that there's a turning of blind eye and just let's blame the parent for this or that. And, maybe that goes to just a general lack of responsibility in the culture too.
Lack of responsibility, and psychology does give an out by saying, well, people are traumatized when they're children by their parents to doing that. So there generally is this attitude, and I agree with you, of blaming the parents and not holding up people to own up to their own issues and to their own problems. That is true. That is true. And I'm sure you're right about Christianity. Although Christianity also goes the other way, where it denies the child an emotional life and it crams him with duties and responsibilities and prayer and obedience, and all of that. So it could go either way.
I picture, like, when I think of Christianity's view, and maybe that, I don't know, this is my just really like 30,000 foot view. Like, if I were to, essentialize what Christianity sees a child as, like the cherub, this perfect little innocent thing, which of course doesn't really jive with original sin, but I picture the baby Jesus, and it's not even true for like a baby. A baby is a human being and still is acting in this raw, self-oriented way, not rationally selfish, but it's doing a disservice even to the baby or to the child to treat it like this innocent, pure being. It's not human.
Yes. I mean, Christianity definitely has a role in us ascribing purity to the non-reasoning. But a baby is non-reasoning. He has no capacity to be rational. So in that sense, they are innocent, but in Christianity, that means a lot more than it does in us. So, yeah. So I'm being challenged on the chat by Ashley on my knowledge in psychology. So I better shut up because it's not my field. I'm speculating here more than anything else, but certainly about the state of the science, which I know almost nothing about, other than, from talking to psychologists. What do I know about?
It doesn't matter because your knowledge is so wide that there's value to be gained, even if it's not your expertise on almost any question I find.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let's run through some super chats here. Thank you, Joshua. I really appreciate that. You mentioned Klaus being one of your top 10 Christmas movies, which you didn't remember much about the movie. Now I don't remember anything about mentioning Klaus as one of my top 10 because I don't think I've seen Klaus. I'm looking at it now. It's a 2019 movie in Spanish. I definitely haven't seen it. So I either misspoke or no, I haven't seen the movie. Maybe I should. Let me know if you recommend it. All right. What do you get from a desire to control other people? A kind of sick thrill and pseudo self-esteem. Does pseudo self-esteem just amount to a thrill from getting away with something you know is wrong? No, I think pseudo self-esteem is getting away with something that, so for example, you supposedly achieved something, but you know it wasn't due to your skill, but nobody else does. So you could kind of pretend to feel something good about yourself, but it's not. You're not really feeling good about yourself. So it's a momentary flash of pleasure for doing something, but it's not real self-esteem because you didn't achieve it in the fullest sense of the term, right? So, and what do people get out of a desire to control other people? Nothing good. They get to satisfy their emotions. They get to satisfy their desire. They get maybe a thrill, kind of a not quite pleasure, but something close to pleasure, you know, in a sadistic kind of sense. But they get positive emotions, detached from reality, not sustainable, and don't add up in an integrated way to happiness. But they get some kick out of it. The sense that they have power over other people gives them a certain pseudo self-esteem, this pretense that they are worthy, even though they really know they're not. They get dopamine, as Alexander says, but they don't get anything substantive, lasting, meaningful. How is your Spanish while living in Puerto Rico? It's still basically zero. It's about the same as it was before I went to Puerto Rico. I don't really have any plans to learn Spanish. Puerto Rico is going to have to learn English. That's my general attitude. My general attitude generally when I go visit other countries. English is the global language, and you better catch up, everybody. So it's pretty arrogant of me, but that's worked for me so far, and I've traveled to lots of countries. I understand what makes Rourke the hero of the Fountainhead. However, what makes Galt the hero in Atlas? What does Galt do understand that Rourke doesn't? Well, what makes Galt the hero in Atlas is that he is the mover of the action. He is why everybody's doing what they're doing. He drives the external action that happens in the novel. And he is the character that defines what is good and what is evil, what is moving forward and what is moving backwards. So he defines the theme of the novel, because the theme of the novel is the role of man's mind in human life. And Galt shows that. And he shows what happened when the mind isn't there. I'm trying not to give any plot away. Isn't there. So Galt is everything in the novel, even though he doesn't appear until 2/3 in. Not explicitly anyway. Because he's driving everything, including the major conflict between men of the mind and men of the irrationality. What does Galt do understand who Rourke doesn't? Well, what Galt does is he stays in the query in a sense, right? I don't want to give it too much. I don't want to give too much away. But fundamentally, the difference is that Galt gets it fully and acts on it. Galt wants to change the world. Rourke doesn't. Rourke just wants to produce, wants to build his stuff. Galt refuses to produce and shifts his focus to changing the world. And that's the big difference. Rourke and the Fountainhead is focused internally on yourself. Atlas and Galt have finished the focus internally, have completely integrated everything internally, and are now shifting outside. How much of a negation of reason has our response and reaction to COVID been in your eyes? I believe it's the biggest I've seen in my life. I mean, it's huge. I don't know if it's the biggest in my life, but it looks like it on a cultural basis. But it's huge. That's what I said earlier. I could never imagine the culture doing what it's done. left, right, center, from the president to the CDC, to doctors, to man in the street. Everybody has blown this, just blown this. And nobody seems to care. So the whole thing is a negation of reason and disappointing and astounding to me, just astounding. Comment on the possibility that using resources to deal with the virus versus the strategy of stop the virus might have been better. Comment on the possibility that using resources to deal with the virus versus the strategy. I mean, yes, I mean, there's all kind of things you could have done better than what they have done. So certainly deal with the virus. And I said this early on, instead of locking down, build more hospital capacity, which means deal with the virus. Don't, instead of flattening the curve, expand production, which is what capitalism does. Open up visas for doctors and nurses to come in from overseas to help out with the surge. Now, that can't happen very quickly, but it could have happened between March and now. There are lots of things we could have done. Lots and lots and lots of things we could have done that would have not involved locking us down. We did none of those. I mean, one of the questions, I guess, is just, I mean, I'll talk a lot about this on the 31st, because this is a big story of 2020, so I don't want to talk too much about it here. But there's a lot that could have been done. There's a lot that should have been done. There was a lot that was planned to be done that wasn't done. And all done way too late. And the CDC's failure to devise a test, or the CDC's failure to accept an imported test, I think because of the whole Trump attitude towards not made in America, is a big reason why we're in this mess. And why it got out of hand, and the feeling was that at that point, it was just out of control and you had to lock everything down. But there is so much that went wrong. This, yes, I mean, we could have dealt with the virus without trying to stop it. But a lot of people would have died. A lot of people would have died. And that's a reality. A lot of old people would have died. You can do both. You can slow down the virus until a vaccine and deal with the virus at the same time. You could protect the elderly and let the rest of us live our lives, which should have been the strategy from day one. Why do people fear the long-term effects of the vaccine more than the long-term effects of the virus? People have been taught forever that man-made is dangerous. Natural is good. Well, the virus is natural. Vaccine is man-made. So nobody talks about it. So people are more afraid of the man-made than the vaccine. Right? And no, there's no reason to fear the vaccine as far as we can tell. And yes, it's a new technology, the mRNA, but it's so specifically targeted that it's, and this is why it doesn't have a lot of side effects for 99% of the people. It's so specifically targeted that it doesn't do damage outside of that specific target, and that's why it's probably quite safe. People fear GMO food, even though GMO is just human beings tampering with evolution. Why are human beings worse at tampering with the genetic code than evolution is randomly? It's just the whole attitude is wrong. All right, let's see. Okay, let's do a quick round with our contributors, and we'll call it a day. Roy, quick questions, guys.
Right. For decades, When the subject of pragmatism has come up, I would say the problem with pragmatism is that it's not practical. Now, as far as I know, I mean, that certainly wasn't the extent of what I would say about it, but I like that phrase. Now, as far as I know, I devised it myself and I enjoy it. Do you know whether I've actually stolen it from any objectivist source and unwittingly?
I don't think so. I don't know. It's consistent with objectivism, but I don't know. But I don't know. Emmanuel, I don't know why you're not invited to these. Send me an email. Sorry, Roy. Send me an email and I'll let Angela know and we can investigate and figure out why you're not invited to these. But you should be. You should be invited to all the hangouts. I don't think you stole it from anybody, Roy. And I think it's right. Pragmatism is impractical. And
Good.
therefore,
I'll keep using it then.
yeah, absolutely. All right, Daniel.
A lot of people on Wall Street are saying what you've been saying for a while now, that inflation is coming back. A year from now, where are we going to be? 4%, 5%? And how crazy is the Federal Reserve going to be in their reactions?
I don't know. I mean, inflation is so hard to predict. We've been wrong so many times.
Oh, yeah.
Over and over again, right? Because the deflationary forces in the world are so strong. That is the increased productivity in the rest of the world, the increased productivity and the low trade barriers. So we benefit from the low productivity elsewhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And then, so I don't know. I suspect it's going to be above 2%, which is their supposed target.
Right.
I also think in a year from now that they will be hesitant to increase interest rates because their attitude, because the economy is going to be struggling. Mm-hmm. So we will have low interest rates and climbing inflation. So it won't be quite stagflation because inflation won't be yet at levels where it'll be a crisis, but it'll be going in that direction. So I don't think the Fed will respond quickly. I think the Fed will take its time responding, which will allow inflation potentially to increase. So in 2-3 years, we could have much higher inflation. But I'm so hesitant because I thought this after financial crisis as well, that at some point inflation has to happen, and it didn't. Now, I think now because of the trade barriers that Trump put in and that Biden is likely to continue, the deflationary pressures or the anti-prices going up pressures might be declining. China's economy is not growing as fast as it was in those years. It is not a deflationary force as much as it has been in the future, as much as it has been in the past. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Government spending's at an all-time high. It's got to hit sometime.
But it was after the Obama stimulus as well.
Yeah, but that was what, a couple of years, $2 trillion a year or something.
Yeah, I know. You're right. Trump has been doing this. Trump and Republicans have been doing this now for 4 years. And now we've got these stimulus packages much bigger than that stimulus package. So yes, and debt is high and borrowing is high, and the Fed has done stuff on its balance sheet that's unprecedented on top because it never unwound the original balance sheet. So this is on top of everything it did in the financial crisis. So it's inevitable. It's just when and how it manifests itself is hard for me to say. But yes, I think that's where we're heading. We're heading towards more inflation, and I don't think the Fed will react very quickly. I think the Fed will be slow to react. We don't have a Paul Volcker at the Fed.
No, we don't.
I mean, this Powell guy is a nothing. He's a nobody. He really is.
Yeah. Yellen's not going to push him.
No, and Yellen's not going to push him, and Biden won't push him because Biden won't want to do anything to hurt the economy. And the Republicans won't push because they never have.
No. Thank you.
Sure. All right, Andrew. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Noel. And thank you, I don't know who that is, KPHX Inc. Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
I was just curious. You've said that the hospitals in Puerto Rico are pretty bad.
No, in
So
California. The hospitals in Puerto Rico. Yes, they are bad. Yes.
do you have a concierge medical service?
I do. And my doctor
Okay.
at the concierge medical service is an emergency room doctor. So if ever I have to go to emergency room, I'm calling him and he's going to meet me there. Because I would not want to navigate a Puerto Rican emergency room by myself. And if I ever need any kind of significant treatment, or if I need hospitalization and I would get on an airplane and fly to Miami. That is my plan. And I've also—
But they're pretty well equipped. Your medical service is pretty well equipped.
What's that, say again?
I was just going to say your concierge medical service is pretty well equipped for.
Yeah, I like them a lot.
Yeah.
And then I also have this concierge medical service now out of San Diego, which I will describe more in the future because I'm going for my first visit. And they're hooked up with MIT, not MIT, Mass General. So I'm all over the map. So my attitude towards healthcare is, if anything happens, I want the best in the world. And so I've got insurance that'll cover the best in the world. It covers me in Puerto Rico and in the US. I've got international insurance. My attitude is, you don't putz around with this. You go to Mayo Clinic, you go to Mass General, you go to Cleveland Clinic, you go to where the best people are in the world and deal with it if it's important, if it's life-threatening. And that's my attitude towards medicine. If you have the time to do it, right? If you have the time to do it.
Gotcha.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, guys. All right, reminders. 12/31, New Year's Eve, that's Thursday. We will be doing a show, kind of a summary of 2020. It will be a match. There will be a match during the show, up to $5,000. So if you've waited to support the Iran Book Show until the end of the year, that will be a great time to do it. You can come on. You can stay the whole 3 hours that I'm planning to be on, or longer, until we reach 5,000. Or you can just come on for a few minutes, make a contribution, know that it goes towards a match of $5,000, and off you go to a party, to your party or whatever you're doing to celebrate New Year's Eve. Although this year more than ever, I'm not celebrating 2020. I'm celebrating 2021. So getting 2020 over with. So I'll be on at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. Central time, 5 p.m. Mountain time. And we'll start then. We'll see how long we have to go until we raise the $5,000. Please join us. Please bring your checkbook. Please be willing to contribute. Thanks to everybody who supported the show today. Thanks, Roy, Daniel, and Andrew, for being here, asking questions. And I will see you all on the 31st so we can send 2020 off into the sunset. Bye, everybody.